I've dreamt of my wedding day since I was a little girl. I remember my friends and I used to play games where we would dress up and pretend to marry each other. Nothing was more exciting than when a friend or family member was betrothed. The days leading up to the celebration were filled with joy and anticipation. Everyone would come from near and far to celebrate the new couple. The festivities would sometimes go on for weeks. I couldn't wait for it to be my turn. When I was finally of age, my father introduced me to a young man named Joseph. He was everything on my wish list. He was handsome, of course, smart, strong, hardworking, but most importantly, he was really humble and he loved God. Joseph came from a family of carpenters and he used to make me the most beautiful wooden carvings as gifts. I still have all of them. It wasn't long before we were betrothed. Even though neither of our families had very much money, they managed to scrape together enough of a dowry for us to start our own family. It was like all my dreams were finally coming true. Wedding planning was underway and everything was starting to come together until one day when I received an unexpected visitor. I was busy making arrangements for the big day and truthfully doing a lot more daydreaming about our life to come than anything else when suddenly the room was filled with warmth and light, almost as if I was in a dark room and someone had drawn back the curtains and let the sun in. And there was this sound. It's hard to describe to you, but the best I can relate it to is like the sound of a rushing wind before a big storm. I remember stumbling backwards, trying to catch my breath, when out of the brightness I heard a voice say, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." As my eyes adjusted to the brightness, I saw what appeared to be the figure of a man standing in front of me. Only I knew this had to be a messenger from God because this was no ordinary person. I was shaking uncontrollably and too frightened to say anything, but I vividly remember thinking to myself, why would he call me highly favored? I'm just a peasant girl. There's nothing special about me. And then the voice spoke again, almost as if he knew what I was thinking. And he said, "God has chosen you. You're going to have a baby and you are to name him Jesus." That's when I found my voice. What? How can this be? I've never been with a man. I'm not even married yet. For the rest of my life, I will never forget the angel's reply. He said, "Nothing is impossible with God." I've been taught the scriptures since I was a little girl. There are plenty of stories of God sending mysterious messengers to deliver important news. And there are even stories of God creating life in the wombs of old or barren women, but never have I heard of a story where God has directly given someone a baby. And that's when I knew God must have something very special in mind for Jesus. Even though I felt anything but brave in that moment, I summoned every bit of courage that I had to say, "I am the Lord's servant. May it be done to me as you have said." And then, just as mysteriously as he had come, the angel was gone. All of a sudden, it was like my world was turned upside down. Just moments before, my wedding dress had been the most important thing in the world to me. But now, could the Son of God really be growing inside of me? Doubt started to creep into my head, but then I heard the angel's words again. Nothing is impossible with God. I was still shaking, but now it was from excitement rather than fear. This is the most amazing thing that had ever happened to me. God had chosen me to carry his son into the world. I wanted to tell someone. But what about my family? And what about Joseph? He would surely think that I had cheated on him. I needed time to clear my head and sort things out, so I packed and I went to visit my cousin Elizabeth. You see, despite the age difference, Elizabeth was like a sister to me. We tell each other everything. And much to everyone's surprise, she was also pregnant, in her old age too, just like Rachel or Sarah in the scriptures. If there was anyone who would understand a miracle baby, I knew it would be her. Elizabeth greeted me that day as she always does, with a huge embrace. But this time I could feel her stomach move beneath me as we hugged. When we pulled away, she looked me in the eyes and she said, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is your child." I was shocked. How could she know? It wasn't like I was showing yet. When I asked her about it, she said, "As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ear, my child jumped for joy." It's almost like the kid knew who I brought with me. What did God have in store for these two boys? I had a feeling it wasn't just my world that was about to be turned upside down. When the time finally came for Elizabeth to give birth, I knew it was time for me to return home and face reality. I was starting to show by this point, so it wasn't like I was going to be able to hide the truth much longer. I had to tell Joseph. I knew it didn't look good. Engagement is as good as marriage in our culture, and people do not look kindly upon affairs. Worst case scenario, he could reject me publicly and have me stoned to death for adultery. Even though I had never been with a man, I knew the evidence would be stacked against me. The talk went about as well as I could have hoped for. Even though Joseph was understandably hurt, even in his pain, he treated me so kindly and gracefully. He said he didn't want to disgrace me, and so he decided to divorce me privately. This would honestly give both of us the best chance of moving forward anyway, but I was devastated. Just months ago, I had been daydreaming about starting my life with this man that I loved, and now I was walking into this unknown season completely alone. But then the day before we were supposed to sign the papers, Joseph came to my parents' house and asked to see me. I remember he was pale as a sheet and shaking from head to toe. Looks like someone else had been visited by an angel. He told me he had changed his mind and he would accept me as his wife and Jesus as his own son. Turns out my wedding day looked nothing like what I had dreamt about as a little girl. The ceremony was quaint with only our closest friends and family, no lavish parties, no week-long festivities. The ceremony was short and simple, and you would have thought that I would have been disappointed. But actually, I felt like the most blessed girl in the entire world. After that, things pretty much went back to normal. We mostly kept to ourselves to avoid the rumors. Nazareth is a small town, so gossip tends to spread pretty quickly. But then, not long before I was supposed to give birth, there was an announcement from Rome. Caesar Augustus had issued a census. Everyone was to return to their hometowns to register. For us, this was Bethlehem, which was 70 miles away, and I was very pregnant. Both Joseph and I were pretty worried about what would happen if I went into labor out on the road. Under normal circumstances, I would deliver at home surrounded by my mother and other women from the village to help me through the process. But if we left, we'd be doing it all alone. But the law is the law. Joseph had to return home to register, and there was no way we were going to be split up now, not after everything we'd already been through. So we prayed a lot, and we packed, and we started down the road. The journey was excruciatingly slow, and every day felt like an eternity. Joseph did all the walking and let me ride on the donkey, but I was still so uncomfortable, and I could just tell that I was getting closer and closer. Jesus was getting ready to come into the world. No sooner had we reached the city limits than I felt my stomach tighten, and even though I had never done this before, I knew it was time. My baby was coming, and we didn't even have a place to stay yet. The next few hours were just an absolute blur. We stopped at every inn in town, and there wasn't a single empty room or even an open bed. With each contraction, I just kept repeating to myself over and over again, nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is impossible with God. Finally, we found a man who led us to, of all places, a barn behind his house. Joseph made me a bed out of straw and cleaned out a feeding trough to use as a manger. It's not exactly where I pictured delivering my first child, but at this point in the process, I was just so thankful to have a roof over my head. And then there he was. And the minute I looked into his small, beautiful eyes, I forgot all the pain. Jesus cried for a little bit and then fell asleep. And for the first time all night, it was silent. I awoke a few hours later to the sound of voices. The small stable was filled with shepherds. At first I thought they were there to kick us out, but they were standing around my son, pointing at him, saying, "It's him! It's really him!" And then they told us that earlier that evening they'd been out tending their flocks when the sky had lit up with angels singing, "Glory to God!" And one of the angels had told them that a king had just been born and they would find this king lying in a manger. So they had set off, searching every stable that they knew of until they found us. How interesting that God would send a group of shepherds to be Jesus' first visitors. Not that I have anything against them, I don't. It's just that in our culture, shepherds are seen as outcasts, and many people actually despise them. I mean, they aren't exactly who you'd expect to be the guests of honor for a king's arrival. And yet, as I watched them that night, huddled around my newborn baby, calling him names like Savior, Christ, Lord, I couldn't help but think that God knew exactly what he was doing. The Son of God, born in a barn to peasants, lying in a manger surrounded by outcasts, was all starting to make sense to me. Jesus wasn't going to be what anyone had expected of him. Sure enough, my little boy grew into a man who would go on to turn the world upside down. I should have seen it coming, right? He was already inviting people in and he was only a baby. It's just who he was. He would go on to lift the lowly, honor the humble, scatter the proud, restore the broken, fill the hungry. And one day, my mama heart would break as I watched him make the ultimate sacrifice. Jesus would go on to live up to his name. He was and is God's way of saying, "I love you."